Good evening, Jamie.
You'd suit the Jamie Boyle look, you know.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's coming on, that beard, lads. It's coming on. Hi, Bill. Hi, everybody. Lots of people joining with me. Right, okay, guys. This isn't a Newcastle United one, although I am going to get a little bit of Newcastle United stuff in here. Jamie, who obviously is down in Middlesbrough, might not realise that there was a behind closed doors friendly today between Middlesbrough and Newcastle. And Middlesbrough are 2-0 up. Newcastle won 3-2.
Wow.
And Muto and Joe Linton scored, two people who can't hit a barn door. So, but yeah, Newcastle won 3-2. Means nothing, but at least the two local clubs are helping each other out, Jamie, which is exactly what we do. Newcastle and Borough helping each other out. So we're here tonight to discuss, obviously, Lee Duffy. That's why I got you on. You've obviously written not one, but two books. Both great books. I've read them both. The Whole of the Moon and the Blood Moon. You've also brought out the Lee Duffy DVD, Whole of the Moon, as well. So plenty to talk about. Now, I thought I'll get you on because obviously I'm going to be putting this up onto YouTube as well. A lot of people interested in truth writing, and I thought if there's anybody who can answer questions about Lee Duffy, then it's you. So I wanted to do it in chronological order, really, just so people get an idea. That a lot of people have heard the name, but they won't have really grasped who Lee Duffy is. They might know a little bit about him. They might know, you know, how he met his end or whatever. They might know where he's from. But I just thought, you know, you'd be the right man. So where was Lee Duffy born, first of all?
He was born in Middlesbrough. What day are we on today?
It's the 9th of June. It's Bladen Races Day today.
It would have been June the 11th, 1965. He'd have been 55 coming up. Lived in the centre of Middlesbrough, but moved in an area, Southbank, when he was literally a toddler. You know, suffered at the hands of bullies. He had, you know, people used to say, you know, it's certainly not me, but, you know, I've been and I've spoke to the people who used to say he was picked on because of the size of his head. He looked Down syndrome. He had big lips. He suffered really badly at the hands of bullies. He was beaten up when he was 14 by around 6 lads, and he was given a sum of £80, which was quite a lot of money in 1979. And then he started going in the Borstals, you know, and he left school. Wanted to be. He'd done a few like YTS courses, like scaffolding, but you know, from the ages of about 17, that's when he really started taking off. And he became, you know, he kind of climbed up the ladder, if you like. And he you know, he just went on a journey that, you know, that Middlesbrough's never seen before or since again. And, you know, here we are now, what, 29 years on, talking about some young kid from Southbank. You know, the Sayers film will feature him. There's been 2 books on him already from me. Stephen Richards did ones like 20 years ago, almost. We've done a documentary on him. There's one in the Post. And it just seems to be roller coasting, Steve, that everyone seems to just want to, you know, just want to know really what this young kid was about. You know, and he just, in August 91, when he died, you know, I was an 11-year-old kid. I'd never met him, but I'll never forget that feeling of, you know, wherever I went for 2 weeks until his funeral on September the 9th, 1991, which was like 12 days after his death, 13 days after his death. You know, it was just almost, Middlesbrough was a really bizarre, even if I went to the newsagents, you know, it was like the town stood still. And I've spoke to police officers. Funny enough, I was talking to Lee's last ever victim the other week. You know, and basically anyone who come across him, even if you met him once, it was, you know, people talk about meeting, like, you know, it's like in folklore and myth, meeting the abominable snowman, seeing bloody Bigfoot, you know. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but it's people, I've met a lot of people who just said I met him once, but they never forgot him. And, you know, everyone remembers where they were when they heard the news that that Lee Duffy died. And I've never met, you know, I study a lot of criminals. You do as well. You know, and it's just, you know, it's embedded in folklore now forever. And certainly in my lifetime, his name will never be forgot about in the town of Middlesbrough.
You say he was bullied when he was 14, but you know, did he have a happy childhood? I mean, you know, we hear a lot of the stories from a lot of the hard men when you watch things like James English's podcasts and Sean Atwood's. I think the one common denominator is that, you know, these people had a tough upbringing. Some of them were in care homes where they were abused. Some of them had, you know, came from split homes, and you know what I mean. They struggled, and there was some trauma. Others had abusive parents, abusive fathers who maybe beat them within an inch of their lives. So, did Lee have a happy childhood growing up in Southbank?
I don't think he did, because he obviously, you know, I've spoken to the next door neighbours, which is a lovely family called the Cox family, and they've been there now 57 years, and you know, they lived next door to Lee for probably near enough 20 years, 18 years when he was in prison. And you know, they said to me, I'm just going what she said, and she said, listen, you know, we used to hear Lee screaming, you know, back in the 70s, when you know, when you were brought up, you know, if your dad drank and beat you up, it wasn't as like, you know, today's society is very different, and you know, it's obviously.
I'm saying it was accepted, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. You know, today, in my opinion, you know, and in a lot of others' opinion, he would have been put into care. I've spoken to people really close to Lee. I'm not going to name them, you know, and they've given me that. They've given their own views and said we had it really hard. You know, so basically, you know, the neighbour was telling me once when you know, the father pushed the mother out of the window and broke a collarbone and all this, and you know, certain children, when obviously the mother went first, weren't allowed to go to the funeral, their own mother's funeral, because the dad still had this, you know, this isn't hearsay, this is from their own mouths, which was obviously some of Lee's siblings. And you know, I just think basically it would have all been very different today. And yeah, you wouldn't get away with doing then what you know, you wouldn't get away now what you would within the 60s and the 70s.
Where did Lee first learn to throw a punch in anger?
People think he was a boxer. He absolutely wasn't. You know your boxing, Steve. And when you think of Vladimir Klitschko, when you look at all these Kazakhstans, all they do is master the basics. And Lee basically he got his medical, but he never had one contest. You know, and he used to go to the Grangetown Boys Club. He used to look up to his Uncle Rod when he was really young, who was a professional criminal. You know, he's been in the papers recently, lately. That's another story. It's not for me to go into. But you know, listen, Middlesbrough, you know, I dare say it's one of the most working class towns in Britain. And it's a hard place to live. You know, albeit little towns in Scotland, I've been brought up for most of my life in Middlesbrough. And arguably probably Southbank's the toughest town in Middlesbrough. You know, so basically he really did his apprenticeship in the toughest part of you know, a corner of Britain, and in the sun. Laurie Duffy, God rest him, who passed a few months back, he gave an interview in 1993, and he said, in you know, when me and my brother were growing up, we basically quickly learned that if we needed anything in life, we had to learn to fight from it, and that was Lee's basically. You know, he mastered the arts of violence, and he was a young, you know, he wasn't a skilled fighter, he wasn't some kind of MMA, but what he was, you know, his biggest trait was he was one big, strong, boisterous, powerful youth. And he had that in abundance. He had the energy of a greyhound, you know, and, you know, a few people said to me, you know, listen, all he had in his life at times was the reputation. He was a celebrity before, you know, there was no social media back in them days. You know, so people who talked about Lee Duffy, about what he was doing on his weekends, he got addicted to that. You know, so if he was going out flattering for Dorman, he became the most talked about man in certainly in the northeast. And he just, you know, he really knew how. Also, Lee grew up in a time, you'll know about this, Steve, in the late 80s when Mike Tyson was at his most poignant. You know, many people had, you know, Duffy had the fear factor like Tyson. You know, many people would fight him, and they'd be beaten before the floor because Lee would turn up, flat nose, combed hair back, the look, this bad guy. You know, and he certainly was the baddest guy in Middlesbrough at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a myth really now. You know, Lee Duffy is, and he is a commodity, as you prove with the books that you brought out. Tell us about you know the main segment of his life. You know what I mean, from his perspective. You know, he was capable of knocking people out very easily. You know, what was he getting up to in Middlesbrough? What were his crimes?
I spoke to one really close friend who remembered Lee as a glass collector when he was like 14-year-old, and he remembered him as this tall, skinny, lanky youth. You know, a bit kind of gormless looking, always had his mouth open. And he said, you know, come about 1985, he changed. He became the Lee Duffy that, you know, he was once upon a time a happy-go-lucky. You know, and basically in the last 16 months of his life, when he released, he was released in May 1990. Now, I'll give you a fact here from the police. Basically, he died August 91. So that was 16 months, right? In them last 16 months, he was Cleveland police, right? Here's a fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. They had, in 16 months, 96 separate complaints about Lee Duffy. Obviously, some bigger than others. You know, so one former detective, and he said to me, he said, listen, if that's not a one-man crime wave, I don't know what is. You know, many times with people with broken jaws, they would all lead back to this one young kid. But he was very, you know, he was very switched on. Yes, he looked the way he did, but he was very switched on and he was very clever. You know, he had good ways of working people out. He lived off the fear sometimes, you know, but most of the time that, you know, that he instilled in people. And, he, you know, he's just, why is he interested in him? Why is he interested in Jack the Ripper? Why is the, you know, the Kate Craze, Steve Race, Jamie Boyles now? Listen, you know, you doesn't have to make, I'm not not trying to make it glamorous, but you know, if you read any one of my 16 books, there's always a lesson to be learned, and there's nothing glamorous about being, you know, 26-year-old and pushing flowers up. You know, what's astounding is the guy died 5 years off his peak. So could you imagine what he would have went on to do?
Mm-hmm.
How many lives would have been affected if he'd have got a 28, 29, 30? You know, so yeah, it's he certainly left a legacy which I've never come across with anyone. And you know, the thing about Lee, it's unrivaled because he died that young.
Yeah.
You know, you go on the Cray twins, Freddie Foreman, they're all old men. You know, even Viv Graham, he was 8.5 years older than Lee Duffy ever was. So yeah, he was a young kid, and you know, people might not like it, but he was a big part of Middlesbrough's social history.
Owen Gibson says, did Lee ever fight for money?
Yes, he did. I covered it in the Blood Moon. That's me thinking of alcohol. No, he had a fight with a guy. I know the name, but I'm not going to name it. A very well-known name in Nottingham, and basically Lee had been on drugs for days, and the fight was worth £1,000. Lee and a friend of his, they said, how much money have you got on you? He said 12 quid. His mate said 36 quid. So they had 48 quid between them, and he basically said, well, you better not lose. Lee threw the first punch, and it was totally embarrassing. His mate just stood there, and he was just like, oh my God. And the second punch hit, and the guy was out before he hit the floor. He did go to Doncaster with Anthony O and one or two other people I won't name, and there was supposed to be an arranged fight, but there was a handful of people. I know Tommy Harrison was trying to get him to have a fight with Lenny McLean. I spoke to Tommy myself regarding that, and he said that was, you know, before Lee was shot twice in 5 weeks. He said to me that was on the cards, but how sure, you know, how definite it was. You know, Lenny McLean had retired by then; he was getting on. You know, bearing in mind Duffy was 19 years younger, his senior. So, you know, I don't think that probably would have, you know, I think it was probably more of a thing for the books. But Tommy did tell me that, and, you know, obviously it's been spoken of as well by certain people who knew Lee.
Yeah. Paul Oxley said Duffy featured in McIntyre's Underworld with the Taxman, which he enjoyed. Michael Bull says he watched the Lee Duffy documentary on Amazon Prime today. He said it was a good watch.
Thank you.
A couple of other questions. Jab Signature, thanks to Jab, who puts together the flyers and helps us with the show. He says, you hear lots of different stories about Lee Duffy. One I hear a lot is that he was a bully. What's your thoughts on that, Jamie?
Do you want me to be honest with you?
Yes, please.
Listen, there's a lot of things I didn't put in that book. You know, I've never ever said this out, apart from to very close friends. You know, what was sprayed on the motorways about Lee, I never want to reveal because it's not right. You know, what the police told me on certain allegations, I will never reveal because, you know, I know people won't believe this, but I've got a duty. I'm always cautious to the Duffy family. I don't really want them reading things like that. You know, I'm not here to slag a dead man who's no longer here, and I'm not here to glamorise anyone. But if you want my honest opinion on that, who spoke to people that never even come out in court, Absolutely, of course he was. But did he have a good side? Did he bully sometimes? Yes. Well, he was a young kid, you know, in the last few months of his life, he was a young kid in control of a town full of Middlesbrough with a population of 149,000. He was in control of this whole town and everything in it, but he wasn't in control of himself. The drugs ravaged him. You know, he'd go into nightclubs and think them bouncers are talking about me, and he'd just run up punching for. You know, I was speaking to his the last victim of Lee's, you know, and he said, listen, he said that guy was something else. He said he hit me that hard, he knocked me 8 foot across the air. You know, that'll come out in the documentary. I spoke to the police, which are going to be in. Yes, of course he was. I can't butter and paper up the cracks. He did some wicked, bad things that can only be described as bullying. You know, I'm sorry if that goes against the grain, but you know, you've got to remember I've spoken to some of his nearest and dearest, people who loved him, people who hated him, people who were his best friends, and yeah, there's no denying that he did do things like that, of course.
Miss Clary says, do you think if Lee had a longer life, he would have ever straightened himself out and had a quieter life?
Good question. Lorna Lancaster seen a letter, which 3 weeks before Lee died, he went to, I won't name him because he's still alive, but sorry, my sinuses are bad. Basically, 3 weeks before he died, and the priest said, here is a good man who's doing a lot of bad things. He's got a good heart. I've personally spoken to people who told me 3 weeks before he died, he burst out into tears, and he said, you know, I want out of this life. You know, how can I get out? You know, do I think Lee Duffy had the social skills to say to people, not tonight, lads, I don't want to fight, and walk away? Of course he didn't. The only things he knew was that, and he was very good at it. And you know, one of his favourite sayings was, "I'll live by the sword and I'll die by the sword." You know, one of his best friends said 2 weeks before he died, he said, listen, Lee, he said, you need to calm down, mate. He said, you're going to end up dead. And he just stood up laughing like He-Man, like he won the Olympic gold. And he just shouted, I live by the sword and I'll die by the sword, and started popping ease. And, you know, forever young, it's probably, it's something that I think will be tied forever with Lee Duffy. You know, when you think what he was about, the drugs, the women, the music, he was a young lad and he loved it. And, you know, which I put in the Hole of the Moon. I used my friend Graham Seed as an example. Now, I said, basically, Graham Seed was Middlesbrough's worst ever kind of tramp. You know, if there was any bits of antisocial behaviour, Graham Seed was at the start of it, at the middle and the end. Now, he died and come back to life in a coma. Now, he was 6 years older than Lee Duffy ever was when he turned his life around. You know, Lee Duffy's brother sadly passed last year. You know, he was a bit of a naughty lad, and God rest him, and he turned his life around. And he done some incredible things, which should never be forgotten about. So, you know, basically, Steve, can you imagine Lee Duffy? It's like Stephen Sayers and Brian Cockrell now. You know, I think Lee would have been more powerful because he had bullet holes all over him. You know, can you imagine him going into the schools and the youth clubs, saying, listen, kids, it's not the way to go. That would have been powerful. But I certainly think, in my opinion, it was researched a lot. I think he was a good couple of years away from, I think he was at least 5 years away from turning the corner, because he was due to be in court for threats to kill, the petrol incident, which he broke someone's jaw, and breaking Peter Wilson's neck. So he was on bail for 3 things. Even if the jury believed Lee's version, even if the jury believed his version of offence and said the bouncer started on him, you can't get away with breaking people's necks. So he was 26. He was coming out. He was getting double figures. He was coming out in his 30s. But obviously, fate didn't allow him that time, and his life was snuffed out in Middlesbrough.
What was the petrol incident, Jamie? Tell people watching what the petrol incident was.
The petrol incident is very, very funny, actually. It's quite, how does Alanis Morissette put it, ironic, because this lad called David Tappan, Lee, he told me that Lee had been bullying his brother. So basically, Lee had just come off remand. It was April the 28th, 1991. So he went in the commercial. It was a Friday evening. Neil Booth and all them was there. And he actually went up to Lee Duffy and said, can you lend me your father to buy the petrol? So Lee didn't give him a fiver, he gave him £3. So he went round to, was it Asda, I think? Was it? Anyway, some local garage, bought the petrol, went in the bar, chucked it over Lee. A few people in the bar got it. And basically, the police said to me, they said, when we done them tests, they said, if that had been lit, that would have took the full pub up, because obviously, lucky for Lee, David Tapman got the matches wet. I've seen Lee basically knocked all his teeth out the bottom. Basically beaten to a pulp, caught him at the back door. And one guy said to me, who watched it, said he was half dead. And Lee turned to Neil Booth and said, are you going to let him get away for what he's done to me? And this man who told me, they said, the reason Lee said that was he thought he killed him. So if Neil Booth had put a foot on him, he would be doing a joint venture for a murder. And, basically that was Lee's local. We're going to be filming in there for the documentary. Yeah, but it's something that's in folklore. And afterwards, I spoke to a man who said Lee stripped down to his underpants, rather than attack him. So this is how much of a sixth sense he had. And afterwards, he was dancing, singing Jim Morrison's "Come On Baby, Light My Fire." So he had a certain amount of kind of, how can I dare say it? In Glasgow, they call it gallus. It's kind of, he hit someone and it put like a bit of humour into it. One guy I spoke to, it was another one of the victims, like, he said he was that narcissistic, he'd smack him and he'd be shouting, "Woo, what a punch!" And he did love himself and he was very proud about how good he could fight. And, my research tells me he could really, really have a fight. Yes, he lost a few fights when he was a young lad, but I don't think I've never heard of Lee kind of losing a fight after about the age of 18, because usually they were over just one shot and that was it. So that was all mainly, and obviously a lot of people were beat before that, it was Lee Duffy, for God's sake. it was the Duffer. So, you know, everyone knew of him. I knew of him when I was 8-year-old, and I believed in Santa Claus till I was 9. People can think what they want about that, you know. I'd never seen him, but everyone used to speak about him.
Jab signature, John from Jab says, would Lee have fought Ernie Buick, do you think?
I was talking to someone the other day, actually. It was always with Lee. And he said, in all my time with him, he said he never ever went to Sunderland. He said he went to Hartlepool once or twice. Went to Richie Horse's house once. Richie wasn't in. But he loved Newcastle. Stephen Sayers described Lee. And basically, I think it's very fitting way. He said that he was the biggest Geordie he never was. You know, David Allison, he's a very, very private guy, and I've had to respect that. And I don't mention anything, you know. But someone said to me, they said, which I have it on good authority, you know, they said basically, he said all Lee wanted to do was overpower the Middlesbrough lads. Everyone in the borough, he wanted to overpower them, and he'd be seen, you know, it's not me, but this is what he said, kissing the Geordies' asses, hanging around with Stephen and Michael and Manny Bergo. You know, so he was always up Newcastle. He was always hunting Viv Graham. You know, and I spoke to people in Newcastle. Even Manny Bergo, and he said, Jamie, he said, listen, when Lee died, the news in Tyneside was like as big as when Viv Graham got killed. So yeah, you know, this is just my feedback, what people are telling me. So yeah, he's you know, spoke to all your friends, Steve, Tony Sayers, and all them, and this, you know, every Friday and Saturday night, and in the book, The Bay Horse Inn, which is in Buckingham Street. Mm-hmm. They said he was well got by all us Geordies, and I think that, you know, paid out when he was buried, because obviously there was hordes of yous lot at his burial.
Andrew Ray says, apart from the famous Macy's incident, has Jamie got any more stories about Lee coming to Newcastle? I mean, he came to Newcastle quite a bit, but the Sayers brothers used to go down to the Blues in Middlesbrough as well, didn't they?
So, hang on, wait there. Sorry, Steve, can you say that again?
Said, apart from the famous Macy's incident, has Jamie got any more stories about Lee coming to Newcastle? That's what Andrew Ray's asking. And I'm saying, of course, the Sayers brothers used to go to Middlesbrough quite a bit, to the Blues with Lee. And, you know, Lee used to come up to Newcastle as well, didn't he?
I was talking to someone the other day who was with Lee, Neil Booth, Michael Sayers, Stephen Sayers, and they were all on a beach. And just to test him, you know, Lee was stoned or doped up, half asleep. They were all laid on a beach on the come down. And they said, Lee, there's Viv Graham there. So he jumped up, where? Took his top off. And there's lots. You know, marching. I spoke to one guy last year or maybe the year before, and he said he witnessed it. He said he was only a young kid. He was in the Beehive, and he said the bouncers, Newcastle was on lockdown because this scary guy in just a pair of red feeler boots and a pair of shorts was marching up the big market, up and down, just punching any bouncers. And this guy said to me, said, I seen him chasing bouncers around cars, you know. And I Googled this morning because I was coming on. And I don't know whether it's the biggest, right, in population or size, but it says Newcastle is the 5th biggest city in England or Great Britain. Now, for a young kid to walk into one of the toughest cities in Britain, in Geordieland, and demand to fight the hardest of them all, I think that just sums it up. Whether you like him, you know, At the minute, I'm writing the Paul Sykes book, and Sykes done a lot of things like that. And yeah, that's the interest in him, because normal people just don't behave like that.
Yeah.
And certainly the last 16 months of his life, he was always up Newcastle. One guy, I won't name him, but he said to me, he said, I was there once, about 1990, and he said Michael Sayers, Lee Duffy turned up in a car, music blasting, Neil Booth, and all the doormen looked, and out come out of the car Lee Duffy in just a shorts and a vest. And he said, you know what? You thought it had been royalty. And he said he just marched to the front, and everyone knew who he was. And there's lots of stories like that going around Steve in Newcastle. In Ackleton prison, I've done the Brian Cockle book. He'd be smoking a joint, he'd have one behind his ear. And I don't know whether you've been in prison, Steve.
As a visitor.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you're not allowed to move about. But basically, he would just march about all over, and some of the screws would look at each other and they'd look and think, just ignore him, he'll be gone in any minute. It's Duffy, And yeah, lots of stories like that, And this is like, 30 years ago, half the population had landlines.
Yeah. Why didn't the fight with Viv Graham happen?
I think that was only something, realistically, books. Lee was more obsessed with Viv Graham than the other way around. Viv was a businessman. He was smart. I spoke to a close member of the Viv Graham family not long back, and they said he was earning in the region of about $5,000 a week. At times Lee Duffy was penniless, but Lee didn't have any business mind. He just wanted to find men so he could knock them out, and then find more hard men so he could knock them out. He wasn't interested about making Duffy securities or, Duffy bars, nightclubs. He was just a young kid, and he lived for the moment, and he terrorised and tortured Viv Graham. Viv Graham, by all accounts, from the people I spoke to, was a logical thinker. He was very rarely drunk, didn't take drugs. Lee used to smoke joints like people smoke cigarettes. And I think that was the difference between them. And Viv lived about 16 months after Duffy died, and I would say there were certainly more peaceful months of his life than beforehand.
Yeah. Tell us about the death of Lee Duffy.
Yeah, it's the 8-day trial was February the 14th to the 19th, 1993, and Middlesbrough will never see the likes of a huge Titanic trial like that again. There's certain things that I've heard, that will never see the light of day. I'm not interested in, I'm not interested in digging up the past. I'm not interested in, it's 30 years on now, and people have changed, and, there were certain a lot of things that never come out in court. It was you know, I must have walked past the Marton Road Afro-Caribbean Centre for 25 years. And obviously I started doing the Duffy books a couple of years back. And they were knocked down literally instantly. And I would have loved to have went in and had a look. And, you know, I've spoken to eyewitnesses. I've spoken to witnesses who were there, who watched the whole thing. Never spoken to the police. You know, and if you've heard that expression, if I've told you a million times, stop exaggerating. If Lee Duffy ever took any liberties or done any wrongs to anyone in life, then, in my opinion, he got. How can I word it? He got an ending that was far worse. You know, in my opinion, nobody deserves to die the way he did. Yeah, people, you know, sat and, you know, one guy, there was 3 people. I'm going to put this in the documentary. This is not an opinion, it's a fact, because I've heard it from from the people's mouths. One of the men's dead, but if he hadn't have died that night, there was 3 men hid around the corner with a gun, because, yeah, I'm going to put the details in the documentary, but basically Lee had beaten the guy who died, and there was 3 people waiting for him, and I think it was only a matter of time. He would have done well to see the year out. You know, he basically got to the point of no return. You know, I've met and I've spoken to people who were offered 100 grand, a couple of brothers from Middlesbrough, to kill him, and they said, nah, no chance. That's not hearsay, that's factual. You know, I'm never going to release. I don't want to, you know, people have told me in confidence, but, you know, they've also told me the reason why. And, you know, the police have told me a lot of things, and I just thought, you know, Lee Duffy died in 1991. I was around the Middlesbrough boxing scene in 1992. You know, I grew up around the boxing scene all the years to about 1997. And his name would come up, and I thought I knew the story until the last couple of years. And, you know, and you just think, wow, you know, whether you liked him, whether you loved him, whether you think he epitomised everything that stood for evilness, listen, in that short space of time, that man, the chaos and mayhem he left on this planet, you know, even the police have said to me, we'll never see the likes of that again. And I agree with that. So society's changed.
Was it a fight?
You know,
was it a fight, Jamie, or was he jumped? How did he die?
He turned up at the Afro-Caribbean 2:45. This is what the police have told me. The atmosphere turned from everyone was apprehensive. You know, the word jollity was used. Basically, he turned up wide-eyed, saying, "Move, get out of my way." I spoke to the police, and the one guy who helped Lee, I won't mention his name because he's still about, the one guy who helped him in the car as he was dying, Lee grabbed him by his neck and pushed him out the way. So basically, obviously, David Allison was a man who, you know, win, lose or draw, right? He was having it with Duffy. He wasn't like the whole of the town. You know, at the time, Duffy was chasing national names like Paul Sykes and Viv Graham. You know, what was David Allison in Lee Duffy's league? That's not for me to say, but the research said absolutely not. But he was one guy who used to go to the places Lee was. And this, I'll use the expression what the man said who told me. This fabulously fucked Lee off because he wouldn't bow down to him. So basically, heated discussion were exchanged. They went outside. They had a fight. In court, it come out there was one fight when really there was two fights. The fights were, witnesses have said to me, about 6 minutes broke up. But in the first fight, obviously there was only one person in it, Lee. You know, basically the police said to me, the pathologist and everything, they said when you know, it was very sad the next day when, you know, the police had they interviewed him for months. They tried to arrest him, and they seen him on the morgue. He'd been dead less than 12 hours, and this was a big guy. He had a towel on him. He had no marks on him. He didn't look like he'd been in any fight apart from on his hands. Stabbed in the hip, stabbed in the leg, stabbed on the back, and obviously the fatal one, which was just under the left arm. You know, but other than that, he didn't have a mark on him. And I've spoken to you know, the ladies who washed him down, and you know, y'all can't, but you know, basically, you know, bearing in mind, Lee had been up for like 2 days as well by that point. If Lee hadn't have died, him and Lee Harrison were due to drive to Edinburgh for an all-night rave. So that just shows the level of burning the candle at both ends. You know, and you know, what went on, and it was a very, you know, I've spoke to people, and people have sat and cried in front of me. You know, these are people not even in the book, don't even want to be mentioned, but you know, there was no lights, it was just the moonlight, and they said, Jesus Christ, we remember that. And yeah, you know, the next day, some of my friends went down on the BMXs to look at the scene, and you know, there was blood everywhere. You know, yeah, it's something that, listen, that's forever. The biggest thing ever to happen to Middlesbrough. You know, I've spoken to nurses who, when you know, when he arrived in A&E, there was that much blood. The lady said to me, there was a puddle outside the door. She said to me, it was like a scene from a horror film. You know, and basically no hospital in the world could have saved him. I think I put it in that book, Steve, as the most feared thug on in Teesside. He danced with the devil in the pale of the moonlight once too often. You know, we know about the petrol incident. We know about the 2 shootings, but also 2 weeks before he died, about 8 men. 8 men arrived on some premises and they beat Lee with crowbars. Miraculously, he escaped without a mark on him. You know, and that never gets took into account for the attempts on Lee's life. But them men, I know who they were. Obviously, I'm not going to mention them. They were there to basically beat him to death. And you know, I don't think ever again will such a, you know, I'm lost for words that, you know, just a young kid. And you know, it's sad that basically I've spoke to some people, me and you know some people, and they've said, you know, he would talk like he was an 88-year-old man who was diagnosed with cancer. I'm not long for this world. And, you know, yes, he had half his foot missing. He had skin grafts on his knee, pellets in it. But he was a picture of health. And, yes, he took drugs. But, you know, he would have been 55 on Wednesday, and he should still be here now to see his kids and grandkids. And for me, that's very, very sad.
David Lass says, what's it like in Southbank now? He says he's been to the commercial pub in the past. He says it looks like it's been abandoned since back then.
Well, I have it on good authority that the commercial's going to reopen this year. The owner has very kindly let me, for the added authenticness, to you know, which was Lee's local, and but there's not much left of Southbank now. It's like over the border in Middlesbrough. There's not much left of it. You know, it's 30 years ago, Southbank. You know, it was full of nightclubs. It was full of shops. You didn't even have to. It had its own football stadium. It was a thriving little area, and you know, there's it's a very, very, how can I put it without knocking the area? It's certainly one of Middlesbrough's most deprived areas, you know, and I can understand being dragged up in that area, the toughness, that the mental, basically, you know, that was the difference between Viv Graham. Viv Graham grew up. He was more of like a countryside boy. Where was Viv brought up, Steve?
In Newcastle, mate. In the heart of Newcastle.
Yeah, but wasn't it like on the outskirts?
Yeah, it was like it wasn't a West Ender. That was the problem. He wasn't a West Ender like Stephen and the lads, but brought up in the heart of Newcastle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lee. Fuck it, I'm going to just be brutal. He was dragged up. You know, have you seen the Mike Tyson documentaries when he's dragged up in the Catskill, the Bronx, and
yeah.
You know, that was Middlesbrough's version. And he did an apprenticeship. You know, it's very much like Paul Sykes. Lupset is the biggest council estate in Europe. I think it's Europe. Yeah, I'm positive it's Europe. And you know, it's I hope there's no one watching from Wakefield, but it's a shithole. And you know, Southbank, it was a tough place to live. And yeah, it certainly put Lee on the right track for the career that he chose. The rest is history. I spoke to many people who I really respect in boxing. You know, people when I was growing up as a boxer, people like John Pierce Jr., you know, John Dryden, Lee's old coach, Marty Turner. I've never met anyone who said, you know, he wasn't all that. He just fundamentally learned the basics. And obviously good for him and bad for the victims. He molded it into his own unique style of street fighting. And you know, people can take this how they want it. They can quote me on this. There'll never be another Lee Duffy again in this lifetime because of what he did. You know, and yeah, his fighting skills were second to none I've ever come across. You know, bearing in mind, I've done books on your Dominic Neguses, your Roy Shaws, your Paul Sykes, your Brian Cockrell's. I've read 56 of the 63 books on the Cray twins. You know, I'm like you. If there's a British bad guy, I know of him. I know something about him. And yeah, never again will be another Lee Duffy.
Got 5 minutes left, Jamie. Just try and get through these last couple of questions. Miss Clary says, was Lee ever diagnosed with a medical disorder, bipolar or schizophrenia?
Yeah, that's something that I I've asked and I've researched, and I can't ever name this because he'd kill me, but I even spoke to one of his doctors, and to put it bluntly, no, absolutely not. But I spoke to someone related to him, and they said they're convinced that he had some kind of underlying ADHD, or, you know, someone far more qualified, but the normal people just didn't do what Lee Duffy did. And that was just, you know, going around punching people on a daily basis. Just not normal behaviour, Steve.
Andrew Ray's chipped in. Thanks for that, Andrew. He says Viv was from Rowlands Gill originally. So thanks for that. But then he obviously went to Wallsend, which is where he spent like the majority of his life before he passed away. A lot of people saying they've really enjoyed it. Very informative. Top interview, lads. Very interesting. Nice break from the takeover rumours, says Michael Bull. A lot of people also are saying that it's just nice to be talking about something other than football. Michael Chapman says, good interview, lads. Brings back memories of a unique era. Paul Oxley says, who would win, Pat Tate or Lee Duffy? He says, I should know. He says, I know all about Pat Tate after getting hit over the head with a pool cue.
You know what? We can talk about boxers all day, and we can talk about football all day because there's form and there's, you know, but stuff like that, I get asked stuff like that all the time, and you know, you can't realistically answer that. So yeah, I think it's just, that's something for books that I don't really want to be drawn into. But Pat Tate, a fascinating character.
Miss Clary says, brilliant. I'm going to educate myself more on Lee. Very interesting. So the best way you can do that is get yourself on Amazon, watch the documentary, and then also buy the books, Hole of the Moon and The Blood Moon, both available from Amazon. Definitely well worth a read. Get you through another part of lockdown. HH says, good stuff. Cheers. Great interview, lads. Brings back some memories, Andrew Ray. A special era, says Andrew Ray as well. Paul Oxley says, who's looking forward to seeing Steve Bruce on TV again? You've managed to get a football one in, Paul. I've given you that, mate. But yeah, look, I mean, it's great to have you on, Jamie. And of course, last minute, just to say thanks as well for getting every boy's dream out there. The first 8 or 9 reviews are in on Amazon, and they're all very positive. A lot of people who seem to be enjoying it. But Jamie's put together my book, Every Boy's Dream, predominantly about my time following Newcastle United. But there's enough in there for the gangster purist, and there's a bit in there for the Dorman purist, and a bit in there for the people who know us as an actor. So if you haven't already got it, Every Boy's Dream is available at the moment on Kindle, $4.95, and you can also get that on Warcry Press Publishing as a pre-order. And that is available from the 1st of July. So thanks for that, Jamie. Great to have you on tonight, mate. And, you know, stay safe during the pandemic, and I'm sure we'll be speaking over the next few weeks.
Always a pleasure, Steve. God bless. Thank you.
Take care, mate. Speak to you soon. Great to have Jamie on. Good lad as well. And as I say, make sure you get a hold of his books from Amazon. Well worth a look. I'll be back tomorrow, slightly earlier time, 3:45. And I did promise I would do it. I'm going to bring Novi Solano onto Instagram. So Novi Solano will be doing a live interview tomorrow. Don't forget, if you miss any of the interviews or miss any of this, you'll be able to find them on my YouTube channel. So get yourself onto Steve Wraith at YouTube. And all the interviews that we've done over the pandemic are all on there. So hope you've all had a good day. Enjoy tonight, and I will speak to you tomorrow. Good night. God bless. I wish you well.